A very good evening to you. Welcome to another edition of Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polion. We conclude at 10 o'clock this evening with the clip that peaked, and of course you don't want to miss that. And during the course of the broadcast, we'll be taking your calls. I have two special guests in studio as we focus on the life of the women who over several years have participated in politics in St. Lucia, and they have gone through their own travails and challenges. And we've had two individuals who have published a book in their honor. I'll be focusing on that book because during the run-up of any general election, we pay particular attention to the slate of candidates, and we mull and discuss the various individuals who have been selected to contest general election, and we also focus on the female candidates, and there have been very few number of female candidates who have contested general elections in St. Lucia over the last few years, on polls in particular. My guests this evening on the program, let's start with Yasmin Odlum, and she is Yasmin Solite Odlum, Solita Odlum, and working specifically in the area of women and development with the Organization of American States at the Inter-American Commission of Women, SIM-OAS, and veteran broadcaster Barbara Jacobs Small. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Tim, for having us.
You are co-authors of Running in Heels, Women and Politics in St. Lucia, 1961 to 2016. Let's focus on the book and why. What was the decision to venture into that particular project? Let's start with you, Barbara.
Well, there are two stories, really. The first one is, I guess, from the vantage of, from St. Lucia. The Division of Gender Relations had been looking at that as a project for quite a while. And whilst Ms. Chams Gaspar was still director of Division of Gender Relations, I think, you know, she had been trying to get that project off the ground for maybe about 3 years. And eventually last year, they were able to source funding towards the research and the publication of a book. I think their vision at the time was perhaps something, perhaps a magazine type, something summarizing, you know, the participation of women in politics. They advertised, they put it to tender, and my company, Right Angle Imaging, we bid for it. And I imagine, based on our past record, our track record of producing, you know, good solid publications, we had put out Iconic St. Lucians in observance of the 30th anniversary of independence. And we had been publishing for a while, helping other people publish, people like Peter Springer. We've helped him publish some books. So I guess, you know, we gave a good account of ourselves, and they had the confidence to go with Right Angle Imaging. And so that's how I came to be involved in the project. But there's another story.
But people see this as a risky business, publishing books in St. Lucia.
Yes.
Why would you take such a chance on this project?
Well, you see, the history has to be written. And publishing is just, it's a trends in media nowadays, media consumption, how people consume information. And so you find books perhaps don't sell as well, but at the same time you still have to do the research and you still have to document. So I can share with you that what we have done is to publish an initial print run of 1,000 hard copy books, but the book will be published through Author House. So in a couple of weeks, people can buy the book online, download it to their Kindle, and they have the publication. So it's not so much a question of the publishing, but I think we need to focus on the documentation, doing the research, and documenting that particular story, because it's really important in the context of Caribbean politics and Caribbean history, and in the context of women's participation in the political process and how that has evolved over the years.
Yasmin, was there any twisting to get you to participate in this venture?
First of all, Tim, I want to say good night, and I want to also thank you for having me here. And was there any twisting, you say? Not at all. As a matter of fact, it was a total act of serendipity. I was home. Barbara needed a title for a book. I didn't know anything about what she was doing, but for 3 years prior, I had just had this very deep urge to start collecting information on women and politics in the Caribbean. because St. Lucia was a scenario that I was intimately familiar with, I decided to start with St. Lucia, but I had done some of the OECS countries. So as soon as Barb's called asking for a title to the book by yesterday, okay, I definitely knew that, something was afoot here. And together we came up with the title because I proposed something to her and then she deleted a few words, and that's how we ended up with Running in Heels.
What's the message behind the title, Running in Heels?
Well, if you think about it, it's a pun on the word running, okay, to show you how. Have you ever tried running? Were you in Men in Heels? Have you tried running in heels? It is a very challenging task. And so the idea is that, you know, the heel sort of symbolizes traditionally femininity or womanness, and running in these heels. At first the title was Running Uphill in Heels, because we saw it as an uphill battle. But then, not to belabor it, but the running aspect was what was important to us, okay? And playing on that and trying to show that women have certain impediments or had certain impediments when it came to running as candidates as opposed to maybe men had. The ground was maybe different in terms of how they experienced the ground. Yeah.
But Barbara, what was an eye-opener for you undertaking that particular venture?
Before I answer that question, Tim, I think it's important to explain that the vision for this work was primarily to focus on women in elective politics. But both Yasmin and I felt that the participation of women in the political process we cannot only look at it from the perspective of the ballot box and that particular dash and those particular contenders, because as, for instance, the Minister who has responsibility for gender relations made the point yesterday that it really and truly is women that carries political parties. They sustain political parties. It's women who are still hard at work, whilst the candidates themselves are already home in bed after the long electioneering night, you know, the rallies and all of that, and it's women who do that. And so we thought that we really discussed and deliberated about how extensively we will treat with the issues, the topic, the personalities, you know. We should look at maybe women at the policy level, you know, of governance. We should look at women behind the scenes. We should look at women who had political aspirations and who have had perhaps long associations with political parties and for all intents and purposes were part of political parties for a while and who had their aspirations and they got off the mark but they never got to the finish line, and what were the factors that contributed to that. So we tried to give a broader perspective of what that journey has been over the course of 55 years. In terms of eye-openers, there were, I can say there were many, but then perhaps it was to be expected because, you know,
What is the one thing that stood out for you? Because Barbara, as a veteran broadcaster, I'm sure that during the course of your work, especially at Radio St. Lucia, you'd have interviewed so many of those people, even prior to them deciding to take the leap into politics. But you would not have had this kind of that kind of information at your disposal, personal information about them with regard to the decision to enter the political arena and so on. What would have inspired them to do that and so on. But as a result of this book and the research and you having this intimate connection with them, I'm sure you came out with something that really inspired you, that really touched you.
If I may say, perhaps I was more intrigued by the stories of the women behind the scenes, you know, and the sacrifices that they have made for political parties, that in many instances, the people who get the glory, the reality of the people behind the scenes is so far removed from the people who are actually standing in the light of the glory, so to speak. You know, one particular individual really does stand out for me. That's Mrs. Gertrude George, who was kind of like the backbone of the UWP party for decades and decades and decades. And her relationship with the United Workers' Party started from since a very young John Compton started campaigning in Miku, started going down to Miku to explain the political process to people in Miku. And at the time, she was 10 years old. And she lived with her grandmother. And there were no streetlights, and there were no roads per se. And at 6 o'clock, her grandmother would come, from morning, the grandmother would come and say that, "Missy, come ton kadi San Jordia," you know, and she would bache the whole household of her grandchildren that she had. And they would go, you know, through the little inlets and the little inroads and over the ridges with the torch to that gathering place where the people met. And she was able to explain to me that she believes that that is where the inspiration came for the symbol of the United Workers' Party, because people traversed in the dark to that meeting place, you know, to be able to hear Missy Compton. And she remained with that party all her life. And she was a teacher by profession. But I believe her substantial life work is with the United Workers' Party. And one particular little anecdote that just really caught me was there were instances where she would hold back from paying her own bills, paying her own light bill, so that they would not disconnect the electricity in the whatever the constituency office was that she was working at. But there are so many of these stories of the women behind the scenes, and I really felt gratified yesterday when the Minister for with responsibility for gender relations and UNESCO affairs spoke in really glowing and appreciative terms of the fact that it's a whole body feminine that carries the political, that carries politics in St. Lucia, and not just individual people. So yes, that's to that.
I'm told that we have a little technical glitch, so we have to take a commercial break. Back in just a moment. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television as we continue to focus on the book Running in Heels, Women and Politics in St. Lucia, 1961 to 2016, and the authors Odlum and Small. In just a moment, of course, we'll be taking your calls, and as usual, we conclude with the clip that peaked. Let's look at it from the historical perspective, Yasmin. The era when the first set of female entered the political arena. From what you have gathered, what was the mood like? How were the female politicians treated? Because I read a part of the book, and the reference is being made to Senator Margarita Alexander, she being the Minister of Education at the time. And the junior minister, or the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education at the time, was Mr. Louis George, okay, who won the seat, the Mico North seat. And I imagine that it was expected that he would have been the senior minister. Who wants to address this?
Okay, well, what happened at that time, Tim, it was a very sort of...
That was in 82.
Yes, it was a very interesting move because Senator Margaret Alexander came through the handy mechanism of the Senate, but she was made a minister. But I don't think she was made a minister with any sort of regard to putting women in cabinet at the time, per se. She was used to block the perceived political ambitions of Honorable Louis George with the Young Turks in the party. So that was a way of sort of putting him in his place politically. And in a very sort of, at that time it would have been a very almost humiliating way of doing it. I'm not saying that you can't have male serve under female ministers. Okay, because we've had the case where I think Senator Euboldus Raymond, Dr. Euboldus Raymond, served under Honorable Emma Hippolyte. Yes. But I have noticed that somehow that arrangement can be a little dicey. So in terms of Senator Margarita Alexander, when the political advantage had been pressed by the supporters of Honorable Louis George, she was just sort of dismissed and disposed of in the most egregious manner, you know. And that, I think, is because she did not have a constituency to give her the bacca, the support that she needed at the time to have counteracted some of the moves that were taken against her. okay, and some of the diminishing of her stature, I can imagine it must have been very, very challenging for both Minister,
Mr. George, Louis George?
No. The minister, Senator Margarita, the Minister of Education, having to deal with a young and ambitious parliamentary secretary. But I always thought that the leaders of the time who were in government used the cabinet positions very strategically, like almost like a chessboard, to determine who would be given certain levels of power, and so that you knew exactly where you fit in the pecking order of things. Yeah.
And the fact remains that in the end, reading the book again, she just disappeared from the political scene, from public life. And Barbara, I don't know if you, based on what we have in the book, you could shed any light on this.
Well, when I interviewed her, I got a sense that it was mostly her personality and her ambitions where they lay. She was never overtly political, and she says that. She said, you know, to be able to stand your ground in politics, you have to have that type of ambition. You have to want it, you know, it has to drive you. And she never saw herself as a politician, and she was never interested in politics. And also her temperament, her personality. She was a professional. She was a public servant. You know, she was just interested in doing her work and doing it to the best of her ability and to contribute to her country in that way. And so, in as much as her dismissal was a bit discourteous, you know, at the end of the day, she felt perhaps, you know, it happened the way it happened, and she moved on with her life. I didn't get the feeling that she harbored lingering ill feeling because she did not have political ambition. And in her recommendations, because we had asked all the featured ladies to share some of the challenges, some of what recommendations they would make, and her recommendation was that if you're going to go into politics, you must have a heart for it. And quite philosophically, you must understand that it is not about you, that it is about the country, and it is about the good of the country first. And whatever it takes to be able to do that, you have to be willing to give it. Other than that, it is not the place for you. And I found that was very philosophical. I found it was very Christian. You know, and I have tremendous regard for her and that position that she holds up until today.
You think that's a position shared by the other female MPs?
Senator Margarita Alexander was not a politician.
She's not a politician.
She's not a politician. She doesn't have the mindset of a politician. So since she doesn't have the mindset of a politician, it would be easy for her to fade Christianly and graciously to the background. But if you have made the sacrifices necessary to come to the fore and to want something, to be treated like that, if you have the mindset of a politician, it ain't going down like that, Tim. You know, and you have a lot of women in the book who have pushed back.
Like Lilia Harrison.
You know, they've pushed back. They've gone to different parties. I shouldn't say a lot have gone to different. You've had some who've changed parties because they knew that their political ambitions were being thwarted in some way, you know. And I mean, we have the notable examples of well, she didn't run on an SLP ticket, but she was an SLP senator, Tessa Mangao. And then you also have the other notable example of Honorable Sarah Flood Bowron. You know, and these sort of women, they knew that they wanted a future in politics, okay? So therefore, they would be very hard-headed and hard-nosed in terms of where they want to go and what they want to do with their political ambitions in order to realize that.
Was Nurse Lilia Harrison one such individual?
Nurse Lilia Harrison is one of the most intriguing and interesting women in this book. I always told Barbara her favorite in terms of women was Gertrude George, because Barbara likes the behind-the-scenes woman. But I suppose because I come from a political family myself, I'm trying to find her story as I speak, because I just had my finger on it and I took my finger off to talk, and there she is. I am going to read you a little bit of Nurse Harriet Singh's story, for the simple reason that she can't be discounted in the history of female politicians in St. Lucia. She has been relentless in her run, okay? She has run in Micoud South from 1997 to 2011 and has never won that seat, Tim. So let me read a little bit from page 128 for you. Nurse Harriet Singh was originally a staunch member of the UWP who had come forward for consideration in 1996 after the Micoud South seat had been vacated by long-time incumbent Sir John Compton. Her leadership in the community and demonstrated strengths may have inspired the politically astute party leader to publicly declare at a meeting in Micoud South that when the day came for him to decide to give up politics, he would want Nurse Harriet Singh to run the Micoud South seat. Given that Sir John Compton had at that time engineered the political career of another Indo-St. Lucian female candidate, Mrs. Heraldine Rock, it was unsure whether this had been said in the heat of a political moment or was firmly set in stone. However, coming from Daddy Compton, who had never lost in the Micoud district since 1954, such a pronouncement for an anointed one could only be interpreted as a ringing endorsement, even ordained perhaps. So what happens as the story unfolds, and this story came from Nurse Harriet Singh herself, we are very familiar with how there were the runoffs.
Yeah.
And the runoffs were declared unofficial runoffs. And then what happened is that she felt that the first runoff that had occurred against Mr. Arson James, that she had outperformed him by 300 votes. So that is the runoff that should have stood. So when the second runoff came, what happened is that it was declared to be the runoff, and the first one was maybe just a sort of, for want of a better word, a dress rehearsal, you know. But she felt that the second runoff had been faultily handled. Basically, that is where it all started. And Nurse Harriet Singh, once Mr. James was running, Nurse Harriet Singh was running. She didn't care, and what she did so skillfully, she's a midwife, so I like the midwife imagery. She delivered Sir John's seat that he did not allow her the chance to run in, or the party, I should say, did not allow her the chance to run in. She felt that, you know, that she had been treated unjustly. She split that vote so effectively as an independent that the seat went over to Cassie Elias.
In 97, yeah.
You know, that is a politician at work. Okay, you're not going to have me. I'm going to make sure that you feel it where it hurts the most. Granted, after that, she's never had that level of success until she ran with a major party. In 2011 it was, with the St. Lucia Labour Party, her last election, who knows, with Nurse Harriet Singh, you know. And when she ran that last election, that's when she secured the highest ever average she got. I think it was 40% or something like that, from what I remember. I'm looking for it, but I think it was, it was the highest vote. All right, 44.5%. Why? Because she was affiliated with a major political party as an independent or as a minority candidate, because she has run in every political capacity. She has run in a major political party, in a minor political party, as an independent, and she's even been a senator for the party she originally wanted to run in. So there's no characters fascinating to me in the book, and there are many fascinating characters here, as Nurse Lilia Harriet Singh.
Why do you think, Barbara, that Mrs. Heraldine Rock stands out? Because, I mean, it goes without saying, she's the first elected female MP. But when you're talking about female politicians, the only person that really comes to mind would be Mrs. Heraldine Rock. And I'm sure that you would have you have interacted, sorry, with Mrs. Rock over the years? Spoken
Not
to
so
her
much.
and
I
so
think
on? No?
Yasmin is perhaps more an authority on Mrs. Rock than I am.
But you never interacted with her, never spoke to her? Never?
No, because by the
okay.
time I had started working on this book, she had passed.
Okay.
You know, and whatever basic information I had was stuff that I dug up from the archives and some of Yasmin's archives and stuff like that. But yeah, I think perhaps you may be more equipped to talk about Mrs. Rock.
That's almost ironic.
Okay, because there's an issue with your dad.
No, there was no issue. She won. She won by 42 votes. There was no issue.
The issue was she defeated your dad.
No.
Just come to mind. No, but wasn't there a contest between Mrs. Rock and your dad?
May
Yes.
7th, 1974
Right.
is when she ran that election. And she ran it against Brother George Odlum, yes. But when she ran that election, I think at the time, you know, and Rick handles this very nicely in his book. I think
It'll be all right in the morning?
Yes, it will be all right in the morning. Because at the time, I don't think that Brother George realized how much political ground
She had covered.
that she had covered.
She had
He
amassed.
underestimated
She had
her
amassed.
because I think at the time he must have figured, oh boy, I'm running against a woman. Got it in the bag, you know. But I don't know that he thought that. That's time I said I think he must have thought that. But then when he came up against her, and then he realized that she was formidable enough, he used to try to diminish her capabilities by calling her Popote Bouet. And she was very incensed about that, quite rightly so. But that was the type of politics we had, and that's some of the issues that women have, the picong and the back and forth and the mudslinging that happens in politics that women kind of don't necessarily want to deal with. But Mr. Odlum thought that in the rejected votes lay his salvation politically. But I also say to you that Mrs. Rock was used because the UWP party, and used in the most politically strategic way, they knew that she had what it took to unseat. First of all, to possibly unseat, she almost unseated in 1964 George Charles, who was the chief minister. Within 7 weeks of an election, she came in and almost wiped out his chances. If there weren't a third candidate there, Mr. Swithin Scouten, can you imagine what would have happened to the chief minister? So I go on to say that the UWP had already known what Mrs. Rock was capable of doing. So it's not that they necessarily wanted a woman candidate per se. They wanted a candidate packaged the right way to be able to take on this almost juggernaut, this Goliath that they saw happening there in the Rosa Valley area, in the Cul-de-sac Rosa Valley. And so they picked the most innocuous on the surface, innocuous looking character to do it. And boy, did she deliver. Brother George's political career was never the same after that moment that changed the history of St. Lucia in many ways. It changed it by putting a woman into government and parliament and cabinet, but it also changed it in that it effectively blocked the political trajectory, the supposed political trajectory of George Odlum's life. So it's a very seminal moment in the politics of St. Lucia, you know.
But she was not selected to contest the 1982 general election.
She bowed out after she was defeated in 79 when Odlum amassed his strength. And my reading of it is by that time, Brother George himself had picked up a very formidable presence in Sir Francis Michel. Sorry, Sister Frances Michel. And by the time Sister Frances Michel came on the scene and she started to move among the constituents and do her thing, you know, that combination of political heads, they meshed well together. So Brother George won at that time in 79, Mrs. Rock lost, and then she herself said that there's a part in the book where she speaks about she needed to make a living. And because she needed to make a living, she didn't continue. But she was made a senator after that and continued to make a contribution.
But has anything changed in terms of selecting women for strategic reasons to contest general elections in St. Lucia? I mean, based on what's in the book, because we're sticking to what's in the book and the work that you ladies undertook in terms of putting the book together. Do you think that anything has changed in terms of selecting women for strategic reasons to contest certain seats? Still asking the question to you, Yasmin.
Yeah. I don't think anything has changed. I think that is the nature of politics. I think you have to be strategic in the candidates you select for various reasons, whatever capital they bring to the table. You know, so I don't think that has changed at all. I don't know.
But we do not see women being selected to contest the so-called safe seats.
What would you consider a safe seat in politics?
In St. Lucia, Labrie.
No woman has ever contested Labrie, which is a quote-unquote safe seat.
The two Vieux Forts, Vieux Fort North.
A woman has contested in Vieux Fort.
Well,
no,
for
that
the
would
United
be
Workers' Party.
for the United Workers' Party. But there's a whole stretch of male-only constituencies: Vieux Fort South, Labrie, Choiseul, and Soufrière. No. There's possibly a reason why women haven't been running these seats. But I disagree with you. There's the case of Mary Skelly, who ran in Damien Greaves' seat, which was run
I think it's
prior.
Denry South.
Denry South, which was run prior by Remy Lesmore. That would have been considered a quote-unquote safe, a safe victory had the party won. She lost by 61 votes.
Yeah.
A seat that Damien Greaves has performed increditably for all his career politically. And I think that's one of the times when I think that the party in question actually must have wanted to put up a woman that year, because you know, you get the feeling of a bit of political chivalry where Damien Greaves bowed out willingly or unwillingly. He was a good foot soldier for the party, you know, and he went to Denry North, you know, and he performed creditably there. He lost by 100 and something votes or 200 something. I can't remember right now. But what I'm saying to you is that there are times when women are selected precisely because maybe the party feels at a time it is important to have a woman candidate. You know, I don't know if it has to do with the safety of the seats or the unsafety of the seats.
Should we have a quota system, Barbara, where a certain number of women should be selected to form the slate of candidates for any political party? Because I think that is what is being suggested.
Well, yes, there's an international benchmark that countries ought to be striving towards, and that is actually Yasmin's specialization. That's what she does, and she can speak to that. So I would leave that for her to speak to. But I would say that it's because of that whole agenda, I think that was sort of on the table at, it was the focus of the Division of Gender Relations, that it was important to document the journey to date. You know, to be able to have the benchmark, to be able to have the baseline of what has obtained, how the trends have been shifting over the years, and so that, you know, the country can start working towards achieving that kind of parity, you know, in representation at the political level. But yeah, Yasmin should speak.
Globally, we are now moving past reserved seats for women and female quotas. It's worked well in Latin American countries. But I think what has happened is that you're finding that it becomes a game of numbers. So let's take Guyana. In Guyana, you have a system whereby constitutionally a third of your party list has to be reserved for females. The perception is that it's just like wash your foot and come candidate. You just pick anyone to be able to fill up the quota. And that in turn does not translate into any sort of meaningful change in terms of how business is done when you get to the decision-making levels. So do I think that we should still be going with quotas and reserved seats? The Caribbean doesn't seem to have ever been in favor of that sort of quote-unquote affirmative action in favor of women. But for my organization, the SIM, we we definitely champion the idea of the parity system. And what parity says is that you're not going to get any real change until you have some sort of 60-40 representation going on. But it's not just at the political level or the party level. It has to be across the board. So it has to be on all your statutory boards, you know, and all your within cabinet, within parliament, anywhere that you have groupings together. They have to be groupings of representative democracy, which calls for some sort of more, almost more than a critical mass, because the critical mass was always considered 30%. But they want to move past that now and push it to 40 as an absolute minimum that you should have. Now, I suppose the idea you'll say, but isn't it the same numbers game? Right?
But we've been making some strides over the last several years. I mean, to the extent that our Governor General is a woman, we have so many female permanent secretaries in key government ministries. We have women in leadership positions, both in the public sector as well as the private sector. Do you think that will have a natural gravitation towards politics in the years to come, Yasmin?
You see, for me, Tim, it's not just a matter of having the women in positions, as we're just doing the numbers game again. You also have to have men who understand that representative democracy means that, you know, the needs of half of the democracy, which is women, and the needs of men, which are the other half, these needs, they may dovetail, but they also may have areas in which they're not conjoined. So you need different eyes, different perspectives up there. But you need people who are aware of the differences enough to want to implement those in policy. Unless you change the policies of your country, you can put as many women in power as possible. But if it doesn't have an impact on what is going on in your society, I go back to what I said earlier. You're playing a numbers game.
You really don't have that level of influence to influence policy and policy change. It's still, you know, women in leadership positions with no power. And one of the things that came painfully to the fore for me during the research for that is, up to today, women in politics do not necessarily have power. The power brokers are the men in politics. They define the
power broker is the prime minister, if you ask me.
They define the power of they define the culture of the political game and the culture of the power space. You know, they set that
because women let them. If you are a significant voting bloc, as women are, okay, we have to have the gonads to say, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. And if this is not acceptable, you know, we push for reforms as a voting bloc that are going to make life much more, you know, equitable for women.
And, you know, we have a case in point with the story of Justice Lorraine Williams. Now, there was a woman who was actually able to achieve some things that had not been achieved before. Things that, you know, with the support of her other women colleagues, senators' colleagues in the Senate, she was able to push through certain legislation, you know.
And she was not alone.
She was not alone.
Apart from having the support of her colleagues, if you'd allow me, what she had was the women's movement on the ground was moving. I remember Ingrid Skerritt in her days. You know, Ingrid Skerritt was the one who got up and made sure that when the the thing in St. Vincent, sorry about that, the West Indian Commission or whatever was going on. So she made sure that, you know, the women put together some sort of policy paper, and she ran down there. The crisis center was happening with Iona Lingaford. It was a perfect moment for Senator Lorraine Williams to have fought for what she fought for. And it was because of the agitation of the media, primarily through the Star, and the agitation of Lorraine Williams, and the agitation of the women on the ground. All of these forces came together. And of course the disgraced First Minister of Gender Relations,
who was a man,
and who got into very egregious behavior, you know, with his wife. He was charged for physical abuse while being the minister with that sort of responsibility. Now, that is how Lorraine Williams got into the position of having the gender portfolio. She didn't have it initially. But when the minister had been charged and the pressure started with the Star and with the women's groups and all of that, it put pressure on the government not to fire him, not to relieve him of his portfolios, as Margaret had been relieved of her portfolios at the time. But they came up with a compromise, because I think in their case they protected one of the boys. And the compromise was, okay, well, we give the portfolio to Senator Williams.
Well, they chose the right woman. Yeah.
Boy, did
she
they.
was the right woman for the job.
Did she pass the baton to anyone, or did anyone take the baton from her? Because since then, we've had other women who've been in leadership position in the government. We've had Sarah Flood Bobram, we've had Menisa Rambali, and now you have Dr. Gail Rigobert. We've also had Alvina Reynolds, as well as Emma Hippolyte from the Grosse Ile constituency. Do you think they grabbed the baton from her, or took it?
I think what has happened is that you don't have a common core of issues that women have identified as our platform. So you have a minister who may be ultra-conservative in terms of a perspective. You may have another minister who has no decided interest in anything to do with gender sensitivity. And then you may have another minister who wants to do so, but does not have the political power to do it. So you have varying personalities coming to the fore, and the only commonality is that they happen to be women.
So it's not something that's coordinated?
It can only be coordinated when, I think that's where the gender sensitivity comes in. So if people realize the benefits that accrue when you have the whole of women's talents that they bring to the table, and give them the opportunities, you know, and things like that. When all of these things, these forces come together, what you would get is women, a number of women, because without parity it's difficult to do, a number of forceful women inside who would take on the concerns. And let me tell you one of the concerns. There's a lot of gender-based violence occurring right now in St. Lucia, and I think it is not just right now, but it's just more publicized right now, and it's more lethal right now. I have heard cries from the NGOs here for the women politicians to take that on in a serious way and take it into Parliament, and, you know, make the sort of noises that need to be made to say, you know, guys, we really have to attend to this, because this is going to become an issue that women are going to take seriously, and they're going to maybe decide their votes on that. I'm talking hypothetically. This is the sort of sensitivity that you need to have to know the value of your vote as a woman. I remember there's this headline, and it again came out of the Star, where Lorraine Williams told women, do not vote for men who beat you, you know, and that galvanized a sort of support at that time. But that was the first time that a woman had ever come out and said something like, make sure that your vote is something you give to better the life that you live, you know?
But Barbara, what do you want, what kind of message you want to come out of this book? How do you want, what is the selling point? What do you think that people can learn from this book?
Well, I will always say that the history is important, and if we are not careful and we leave the history in the mouths of irresponsible people, the history will get rewritten and retold, and we will never have the facts of how things have happened. But separate and apart from that, I think the very important point of bringing the whole issue of gender parity, bringing that concept down to the ordinary person on the street, that they understand what it means and they understand the significance of having the level of representation that benefits all citizens. That the priorities of women are treated as priorities at the time when they are priorities, and they, that is being advocated, that it's being championed not only by women but by leaders, to be able to capitalize on what is happening now in our society. I think now we're seeing civil society organizations that are growing, that are coming up, that have a there's a groundswell rising among them. And I spoke to different women featured in this book, some of them in government, most of them in government, say to me that that is a priority for them. They say to me that they would like to see women have a greater voice in the decision-making process. And I would like to see them find a way to bridge the divide between everyday politics and the everyday agenda of the government with the movements that are happening on the ground, to be able to find and empower civil society groups to be able to raise their voice, for want of a better term, and to command that kind of respect.
Where do you think that strength will come from, Prabha? You think it will come from within? I'm talking about women, or do you think that it will take a brave man to really lead the charge on behalf of women?
I think that's
Tim,
just semantics.
I don't believe you said that.
No, I mean, women have to accept the responsibility.
But I didn't say it, I did ask.
No, because that is in fact, I mean, to suggest that we need a brave man means that, once again, women are sort of deferring their power to a man. They sort of reposing that responsibility to champion their cause and their priority to a man. And that is then, women need to be setting the agenda for the future of their country and for the future of their children, that kind of way. We need to be working towards equity at all powers of decision making, so I think that this is an opportunity for women to rise up. Women need to play a more active role. We need to find a way to bridge that divide between NGOs, civil society organizations, community-based organizations. We will have to be able to raise the sort of parity issue at that level, not only to do with politics, but to do with representation, any type of representation. You understand what I mean? I think when we talk about representation, people only see it in terms of people in government, but we need to be able to raise the profile of equity, as a society. A society is never just if all the power is in one domain and it's not in another domain. So I think that is the work for women.
What say you, Yasmin? Will it take men and women working together on this issue?
I mean,
it always takes men and women working together. Sorry,
that has been determined globally. That's almost it's totally acceptable. You cannot fight the injustices entirely on your own as women. But I think what happens sometimes in these struggles is that you have layers of women. And I think that Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert referred to that when she was talking about the women who are not well heeled, but they have no heels, no shoes. And we have a very, very high number of single female-headed households. That is a very big part of the female demographic. Anyone going into government has to be able to understand the mapping of your country and how you are going to empower the people who are most vulnerable. And that is where some of the issues lie, the tensions lie between who gets to run, who is the one who can best represent and everything like that. Because if you take on the mantle to represent represent a constituency, you have to be able to take care of the constituency in its varied needs. That's a very tall order. Now, if you then have to go into a cabinet that does not understand the demographic you're dealing with, it's going to be very hard to fight unless you have that core of women behind you who insist, and that core of women comes from the party up. There's a beautiful story in the book about when Dr. Gail Rigobert was elected as the deputy female leader.
Deputy political leader.
Sorry, deputy political leader. Do forgive me. I think the jet lag is kicking in sometimes. But she had that was a strategy. Petra Jeffrey Nelson was behind it. They made sure that they got women at all points of the executive that year. And then, with that sort of base, and with the strength of the women's arm headed by Petra Jeffrey Nelson, they said, so we're now going to strategize to make sure we have a woman there. So that is what you need. You need that pyramid effect. Because once you have that pyramid effect, okay, it translates from the person who's representing at the top, interlocking with all the different layers until you get to the bottom. That is how you get collective strength. And then you can go and say, these are what we deem important and what we are fighting for. This is our core of issues. This is our platform.
Can such a strategy be used so that we could have our first female prime minister anytime soon?
I don't see why not. I see that it's very likely that within the next 15 years we would have a female prime minister. Hopefully before that.
Is that a prediction that you're making?
It's inevitable. It's inevitable.
How do you envisage this happening? Because that female must first be the political leader of one of the main political parties, the SLP or the UWP.
We've had a female political leader before. We just had Honorable Emma Hippolyte try to run for the chairmanship of the party. So women are going to continue to climb up the executive of parties. I don't think that we are losing ground in terms of women wanting to enter the political arena, because women are starting to realize if you want changes in the policies that affect your families, affect your bottom lines, affect, somebody's got to do it in terms of getting into the policy making arena. I mean, of course, Tim. I mean, just look at cabinet. We have 4 women in cabinet because this regime has realized it is important for it to have, I want to say, a different perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that the SLP did not support women in politics. That's not what I'm saying. But the support of women in politics has to be a case where you have the numbers as well as the sensitivity. I saw that the Labour Party was speaking out very strongly, its female candidates, against abuse of women and things like that. What has to happen is that when you denounce it and speak out against it, there must be some way in which as a cabinet you have a significant number of women in there who are going to support that. And then the cabinet has to realize, okay, the bottom line now is that if we don't support this, we're going to have trouble up in the camp there. Because I have never been in a cabinet, I have never been in a government, I've never even been in a political party in any sort of major way. Okay, I have been affiliated with a political party, but never, I've never held executive office or anything like that. I'm saying all of that to say, I am sure that when you get inside, there are lots of things that are very different.
Are you hoping, Barbara, that this book will be available in schools so that the students can read it?
That's not for me to decide. You know, my job is to research it, bring it to market, and make it available. For our part, what we will do is to circulate it as far and as wide as possible to libraries. You know, the University of the West Indies, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. I want Yasmin to carry copies for the International Library of Congress. I think, yeah, you typically have to get these publications to CARICOM Documentation Center. So we'll make sure that important institutions have it in their archive. Make copies available to the St. Lucia National Archives. It's going to be available as an e-book. So it will be available that people who are interested in politics can access it for research purposes. You know, a useful addition to material in academia now, because it's very well researched. It's very weighty in terms of the academic value of it. And so yes, we've done our part, and I'd like to see us continue to document various dimensions of our life as a country, as a society evolving.
How can the book be purchased?
The book will be available in hard copy from St. Lucia Books, which is based at Alias Francaise. From Right Angle Imaging, we'll hold a few copies. But in the main from St. Lucia Books at Alias Francaise, because that is the main now book vendor on island. All proceeds, I want to say that all proceeds from the sale of the book go to the Women's Support Center, which falls under the aegis of the Division of Gender Relations, because the book was funded by UNESCO, and once UNESCO funds anything of that nature, all proceeds must go to charity. And I think it's a beautiful moment, you know, for the Gender Relations Department to be able to do to produce a work that can, you know, contribute something to the Women's Support Center.
And the price?
It's $75 EC dollars.
Okay, so I'm purchasing my book now. I got it earlier on today, so making my payment live on television. Let it not be said I did not pay you, Barbara. So here's that.
You could have written that check, man.
I think he has his $5 in coins. Thank you. That's legal tender.
All right.
Yes.
We'll take a break. You're watching Newsmaker Live. When we come back, your calls. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll put a telephone number on screen so that you can call right now with your questions and comments for my guests. Once again, Yasmin Odlum and Barbara Jacob Small, co-authors of Running in Heels, Women and Politics in St. Lucia, 1961 to 2016. We have a caller line. Good evening, Newsmaker Live. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Yes, good evening, Barbara Jacobs.
Good evening.
And good evening, Solita.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Very good initiative, Barbara, on this book, and it just strengthened the whole ethos of our politics now. But having said this, I also want to ask you.
Yes?
What's your question?
Yeah, I want to ask on Frances Michel. I did not hear you mention her. She was one of the four.
Maybe you joined the program late, caller.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm mentioning Frances Michel, and it's a good program. And ironically, the other two women that I'm going to mention, because it is something that is a topic that is very close to my heart. In terms of the women in politics, when Mary Skelly ran for the Dennery South seat, and she did not win, but it was a close margin.
61.
And it was because of the political Mandarin and whatever that had happened at the time. And also before Mary Skelly did run, there was also Gail Lesmore, who incidentally was the sister of the late Remy Lesmore, and she had lived in Canada, but she's deceased now. And at that time, there was this whole thing to get her involved in the politics, but I think at that time, politics was not destined for women, and she did not make it. But as regards to the Mary Skelly situation, it is interesting, Tim, and I just want to not to divert from that program tonight. Is that when Mary Skelly went in 2005, at the time, I think why she did lose is because the hierarchy of the Labour Party at that time did not get it right. And there was this stumbling around with Damian Grace, who had left and gone to the valley. And as they say, the rest is history. But the reason why I'm bringing it up, this is a woman in that community who has, irrespective of running for political office and did not win. But this is a woman that has made a significant contribution to all aspects of Dennery life, and I'm happy that at least she was mentioned in that book.
Okay, thanks a lot, caller. Do you think that sometimes, in terms of going forward, such experiences can serve women good stead to the extent that either it will encourage more women to enter the political arena or discourage them? But I think we have a call. Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening, Tim. Good evening to your powerful panel.
Good evening to you, ma'am.
Powerful discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share a story that I got from Morocco a couple of years ago before she passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is so relevant to the discussion. She said to me that her first entry into politics, when she was going to run, she was making headway. She was doing pretty well. And when the party realized how well she was doing, there was this rumor that started spreading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And from her account, she suspected that it was an inside story, that she would have been waylaid and raped under the bananas. So in her best interest, the party thought at the nth hour, probably before the nomination day or what it was, but the really last hour, they thought it was in her best interest to withdraw her from the politics, withdraw her from running. And it was like a sure thing. The party was almost certain that she would have run. And do you know who the party sent to replace Morocco? None other than her husband.
That was in 1964 when the husband took over the seat.
That was probably the year.
Yes, it was
And
1964
I think she was
after she ran.
absolutely devastated. She felt betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she set up that it would never happen to her again.
He ran in the 1969 election.
Pardon?
Mr. Edward Rock, he replaced her in the 1969 election.
That would have been the year.
Yes,
That
because
would
in
have been the
1969 there was no woman on the slate at all. And that was the first time it had happened since women entered in 1961. Then women ran again. Well, a woman in 1961, the first, Mrs. Rock in 1964. And it was always curious to me why she didn't run the seat again. But, if the story that you have highlighted tonight is any indication
That would shed light on the mystery.
That would shed light, because I did wonder,
That is
because I
exactly
always
why.
said it was a singular political takeover that has never been replicated in St. Lucia. It's not normally the trend for the woman to break in the
seat. She
seat.
was very hurt. She felt betrayed. She was devastated, and she just felt that it was not right.
Okay, ma'am. Appreciate that
Thank
contribution.
you very much.
Thank you so much. As we continue to take your calls, once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. I think anytime from now, we'll have another caller. Mr. Producer, we have a call? Yes, we do. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah.
Hello?
I want to ask one of the ladies, did you make any mention of Mrs. Wilsina Haynes? Did she ever go up for election?
Okay, I'll take that one.
Thank you so much.
Mrs. Wilsina Haynes, she was the president of Teachers Union at the time, back in the mid-1970s. She actually was never a candidate. She was seen as a potential candidate, but she was a school teacher at the time. So I suspect that Mrs. Haynes, while very forceful on platform and very forceful within the party and everything like that, I do not remember her actually being a candidate, and the records do not show her as a candidate. Because when I started the research, I too said, but to me, Wilsina Haynes was a candidate. But no, I did go and I double and triple checked that. I think what happened is that her name had come out as a potential candidate. And then there's this famous line, which I don't know if it's true or not. It has been attributed to Sir George Mallet, saying that he had more hair in his ears than Mrs. Haynes had on her head, because, you know, Mrs. Haynes was bald. So I think that I say all of that to say that I don't think at all that Mrs. Haynes ever got the opportunity to run.
I think we have a caller line. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for holding on. Go ahead, please.
You're also on your co-authors. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
I'll get it clear in my mind. What are we aiming for? What's the objective? Ms. Odlum to get next 15 years a female prime minister. Is that we think that the female has the solution? Or is it for efficiency? Or is it just for a historical, you know, the data or statistics, or that a woman is prime minister? I don't get a clear in my mind. What's our objective? What was the aim of a woman being prime minister? I'm all for efficiency. If a woman is the best, I am for that. But it's just to say we have a woman there for the statistics, for the figure, for the ego. What exactly is it? Yeah, please, thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's an interesting question, because why would we not ask a question if a man runs to be a prime minister? Why is it such a, you know, a phenomenon if a woman comes up to be prime minister? I go to Chile, where President Bachelet came in with a very decidedly woman-friendly agenda. And because of that, in her time, there was a lot of legislation that went forth, which strengthened the role of women and families, and not at the expense of men, I may add. I think that why we would need to try for... No, it's not we need to try for it. To me, it's inevitable that as more women enter the political fray, that at some stage we're going to have a female prime minister. You know, I don't think it's for the historical value alone. I think that women have the skills to bring to the table to make a difference in maybe ways that men have not foreseen that women can, you know.
We have a caller holding on. Hello, good evening. You're on the air.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. You'll have to speak up, please, caller.
I'm happy to see these two young ladies.
I'm still young. I love that.
Emphasis on young.
Women in politics. I'd like to see more women in politics. I mean, just this week I heard a senator on a political platform, and the kind of nonsense that was coming from that.
Can you speak up, please?
I said, I heard a senator on a political platform, okay? And the kind of nonsense I was hearing coming in this day and age, you're going to call a man a coolie, and you're going to refer to the man as an Indian. I know if there were women, more women, you would not get that kind of nonsense, right? These kind of racial slurs, there's no place for that in today's St. Lucia. We need to do better than that. You understand? The name calling and all of that. And I know if there were more women in parliament, in politics. In fact, you don't hear that kind of thing coming out of women's mouths. Women stand up for what is right, like Sarah did back in the day, right? And you know, you don't hear all these controversies, you know, happening with the women. It's the men that do all that nonsense. So I'm supporting 100% more women entering the political fray. And if you look back in history at the women who were in politics, they came there under a lot of duress, a lot of resistance. And guess what? You know, they kept at it, right? You know, they were disciplined and all that. So let's see more of that. And let's have our women that are in politics or around them keep these men from talking so much nonsense. All right? Whether it be on political platforms or in parliament. And get them straight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What's you, Yasmin? Any reaction? several years ago, people were suggesting that, I think out of frustration or maybe boredom, I don't know, that we should have an all-female political party. I'm sure you've heard that before. It's being suggested in St. Lucia.
I had proposed that in my time.
Okay.
In my heyday.
We'll take a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air?
Yeah, good night.
Hi, good night to you. Good night.
Good night, Barbara.
Good night.
And Yasmin, good night.
Good night.
This is Patish.
Oh, hi, Patish. How are you doing?
How are you, Yasmin?
I'm fine, thank you. It's lovely to hear your voice. What's your question tonight, Pat?
I would like for you to be the Prime Minister. Okay?
Well,
thanks a lot.
That's quite a prediction.
You know, yesterday at the launch, one of the ladies, who was it? Was it Mrs. Japanel? You know, who said, she made the observation that, Barbara, I really like what you're doing. You do what you're good at. And we have to recognize that we need all types of energies, all types of abilities at the table when we're talking about development and progress. Some of us are good at documentation, and that is very valid for where we're going. And we need the record to be there. And so, you know, it's one thing to hear somebody who can maybe speak well and articulate, and they have their area of specialization. We don't need to be a prime minister for us to effect change in the country, you know. And I think Yasmin is doing phenomenal work at SIM. She's the Caribbean specialist.
Excuse me, you don't want me as your prime minister?
Oh yeah, I'd like you as my many things. But I was just making the point that, you know, we always like to tell talk show hosts that we like to see them as the prime minister. It takes a little more than that.
Okay. No one has ever said I should be prime minister. Let me just state that for the record. Our final call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live. You on the air?
Yeah, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Yeah, good evening to your guests.
Good evening, sir.
And let me just compliment your two daughters of St. Lucia. And I think the problem of looking at male or female as prime minister, I want to say something else, that I personally, if you do not believe in developing a civilization that's called St. Lucia, you stay away from the politics. If you believe in that, and you're a boy, you're a girl, you're a man, you're a woman, make your contribution. And I want to encourage the ladies, because we are all just that human being, and the potential that one has, and the courage that one has to develop himself politically for the betterment of all. Of all. If you're on that path, I support you. And if any one of you ladies are on that line, you get my support. Have a blessed night.
All right. Thank you so much for calling. Final comments. Let's start with you, Barbara. Final comments from you.
Tim, I want to say how grateful I am to the Division of Gender Relations for giving us that opportunity, giving Right Angle Imaging that opportunity to participate in this very important project. I feel very gratified to have made that type of contribution to my country. I want to say how very grateful I am that all our stars were aligned at the right time, that we had the benefit of Yasmin Solita Odlum as editor and as our, you know, our long-range memory to be able to help us to weave this book, and so that for it to be such a substantial work. It's really a privilege and an honor. We go way back. We are in fact friends, childhood friends, and this is the first time we've worked together. And you know, I've learned a lot. Working with.
I think you worked together at RSL at one time.
Yes, for Soul Talk.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I must have brought her in to do something at
and
the
I
time.
think you read the news as well.
I read the news, but it wasn't Barbara. Barbara was the
PD.
You know, yes, for when we're doing Soul Talk. Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, I just want to say, you know, how what a privilege and an honor it has been, and I want to encourage the women in areas of influence, those who are in the community, those at civil society level, those who are in government, to be able to find that bridge and come together to collaborate, to dialogue more, and to find where common ground is, where iron can sharpen iron, so that, you know, that will spill over across the citizenry, that we can have more empowered women coming to the fore. We need, people who are knowledgeable about what's happening in their country. Politics is important. We don't always like what's happening in our politics, but it's important, and so we need the more empowered our citizens are, whether they be boys, girls, men, women. Unless you are empowered to participate, you will not be able to participate in any significant manner, and you'll always be at the receiving end, So that's just really my plea.
Okay. Yasmin, final word from you?
I want to end not with my words, because this isn't about me. I was approached to run twice. The first time, I didn't think that I was the candidate that best suited the seat.
Which seat?
Why would I tell you that, Tim? That's between me and...
But you expect me to ask. And which party?
That's between me and whichever political leader approached me.
Okay.
Suffice it to say that I remember saying that I think that the other candidate would be a better candidate than me, and I outlined the reasons why. And that candidate went on to have a phenomenal career.
Male or female?
In politics. The second time when I was approached to run, and actually, let me even backtrack and say, I was getting ready to come home to run.
What year?
That's when my father died. Just
Okay.
after my father died. Because my father had said basically to me, yeah, you're ready now. You can do it. And I was going home, getting prepared. And lo and behold, I got knocked up, Tim. I got knocked up. So when the call came, I was 6 months pregnant, and that was it. Now, whether I would have run for that party as opposed to another party, I mean, that's not to say. But I want to end not with my words, but with the words of Petra Jeffrey Nelson. It's a quote here from the book, and these are her words about St. Lucian women in politics. There is still flagrant disrespect for women, and in many respects women themselves thrive on male domination, not recognizing their worth and their value. In that regard, and in such instances, women are to a great extent complicit in perpetuating an environment that keeps them sidelined and inconsequential in the sphere of governance and equality in general. The mindset of our women limits them to subservient roles in politics, and even when they are active in politics, they seem to pursue their personal interest, looking for political favors for their economic alleviation, and not in the interest of the country. For change to occur, women must stop allowing themselves to be used by the male-dominated political machinery and recognize their worth and the power they wield. Women need to take risks and recognize that our validation is from standing on principle and for what is right, even if you are swimming against the tide. I used the words of Petra Jeffrey Nelson because that's a perspective you don't normally hear, and it's a perspective that it makes us think, what are the glass ceilings in our own minds that stop us as women from deciding to enter the political fray?
Yasmin, thank you so much for being my
Thank you very
guest
much,
on this
Tim.
evening's Newsmaker Live, as well as Barbara, my
Thank
first
you, Tim.
PD in radio. And to you, thank you so much for watching the broadcast, and thank you so much for contributing via your calls. Once again, they are co-authors of the book Running in Heels, Women and Politics in St. Lucia, 1961 to 2016. Thank you so much once again for being a part of Newsmaker Live. Unfortunately, we do not have a clip that peaked this evening, so all I have to say to you is good night and see you next time.